Welcome back to Sola Street, everybody. Can you believe that this week it will already be July? Isn't that crazy? We're halfway through 2020. It's been a crazy year, and it'll be exciting to see what God has planned for the rest of the year. It's been kind of interesting to see everything that's going on in our world today at the same time as we've been studying all of the things that happened to Israel. Some of the things that happened to Israel were not their fault. Some of the things that happened to Israel were their own fault because of the way that they chose to behave. And I'm sure that is true for today. Some of the things that are happening in our world are not our fault. And some of the things that are happening in our world are because of choices that we have made. Okay, so let's try and learn, not just learn about the Bible stories that we're reading, but let's learn from the Bible stories that we're reading. Okay, let's learn what it is that God might be trying to teach us. So that we don't make the same mistakes as the mistakes that Israel made. And so that we can also know who God is and tell people around us who God is, like the two spies did with Rahab last week, which is the story we saw. Because we are about to start a new chapter in the life of Israel. They've spent the past 40 years wandering in the desert after 400 years of slavery in Egypt. Then they're about to go into the promised land that they've been waiting for such a long time. They've watched a lot of people die in the wilderness because of their sin. And they're about to embark on an exciting adventure, an adventure they've been waiting for their whole life, but also a scary adventure because they know that they're going into the unknown for them. But God is going with them, and He's already told them that He's going to go with them, and He's told them to be strong and to be courageous. Okay? And so last week we saw Joshua send two spies back into the promised land and to check it out. And they came back with very good news. And the good news was that everyone is terrified of the God of Israel. And so they made a promise to Rahab that if she put the red cord, the red ribbon outside of her window, which is on the wall of Jericho, that when they came to fight Jericho, that they would protect her and whoever was in her house, because she had faith in the God of Israel. And so before we talk about today's story, I want to tell you a little bit about what God told Moses. Remember, I told you a couple of weeks ago that 2.5 books, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Leviticus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, were about God explaining how He wanted Israel to represent Him to the world, how He wanted them to behave, and how God was holy and that they were to be holy. And He gave them lots of instructions. Well, in Deuteronomy, He told them this. He said, look, you are going to go in to this promised land, but this promised land isn't empty. This promised land has people living in it. And the reason I've waited 400 years to give you this promised land is because the sin hadn't reached a point that the people who were living in the promised land needed to be judged. But now they have. And so when you go into this promised land, you are going to be my judgment on the sin of those people. And so when you go in, you are going to fight them. And you are going to defeat them. And you are not going to be kind. Because they have chosen not to look to God, not to look for God. They have chosen to behave terribly. And I am punishing them, and I'm using you to punish them. So you're going to go in, and you're going to completely take over. And I don't want you to be kind, because if you're kind and merciful and leave some of them alive, what's going to happen is your children are going to be friends with these people, and they're going to teach your children the bad things that they know. They're going to be a bad influence on your children. They're going to be a bad influence on your wives. They're going to be a bad influence on you, because you're going to marry some of those people. And I don't want that to happen, because you're supposed to be separate. You're supposed to be holy. You're supposed to represent me to the rest of the world. So He was very clear that when they were to go into this promised land, there were people there. But God was using them to judge the people in these cities that they were going to go into. Okay? And then He tells them this. It's pretty cool. He says, "Hear, O Israel." This is from chapter 6 of Deuteronomy. He says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, with everything you've got. And these words which I command you today shall be on your heart, because you're going to memorize them. And you shall teach them diligently to your sons and to your daughters. And you shall talk about them when you sit in your house, and you shall talk about them when you walk by the way, and when you lie down and when you rise up. You should talk about them constantly. Teach these things to your children. You're going to commit them. And he says you're going to bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be on the frontals of your forehead. In other words, wear them around you so that you're constantly reminded of the words that I said to you. And then he says, and then it shall come about, when the Lord your God brings you into that promised land which he has promised you, and he promised Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, he's going to give you great and splendid cities which you didn't build. They're already built, but you didn't build them. He's going to give you houses full of all good things that you didn't fill up. He's going to give you cisterns, which are wells of water, that you didn't dig, and vineyards with grapes that you didn't plant, and olive trees which you didn't plant. And you shall eat, and you shall be satisfied, because God is going to give you all of these things, and you didn't have to work for them. Then be very, very careful, unless you forget that God is the one who gave you all of that stuff that you didn't work for. That you forget that he brought you from the land of Egypt where you were slaves and gave you this free stuff. You shall fear only the Lord your God, and you shall worship him and swear by his name only. He should be your only God. Do not forget. And then later in this chapter he says, when your children ask you, where did this stuff come from? Why do we remember these days? Why do we celebrate the Passover? You're going to tell them, because God. Because God. God brought me out of Egypt. God fed me with manna. God led me with a cloud of smoke during the day and a pillar of fire by night. God split the Red Sea in two. God gave me water when I didn't have it. God helped me fight enemies that I couldn't defeat. You're going to teach this to your children. When you walk, when you sit, when you lie down, constantly talk about God. And remember who God is. That word remember is very important. It's one of my favorite words in the whole world, because it's very easy for us to forget things. Even though we think we remember, we get busy and we get distracted with fun things or cool things, and we stop to think about what really, really matters. Okay? So Joshua sent those 2 spies to go look at the promised land, and they came back with very good news, and they said, look, everybody's terrified of our God, and our God is going to give us this land. This is what he told us. He told us he was going to give us houses and give us cities and give us food, that it was all there, and all we had to do was believe him and go get it. And so Joshua said, okay, this is excellent news. Everybody go to bed, and we're going to get up early in the morning and we're going to go. He didn't wait a single day. They just went to sleep so that they could have a good night's rest, and then they were ready to go. Isn't that cool? They didn't think, oh, well, maybe we should sit and think and plan about this. How are we going to pack? And who are we going to take with us? And blah, 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 blah. Nope. He said, it's time. We've been waiting for 40 years to do this. We're going to get up tomorrow and we're going to go. And so everybody went to bed, and God came to Joshua and he said, okay, Joshua, thank you. This is what's going to happen. I am going to go before you, and I'm going to do this. And I'm going to do it in such a way that the people will understand that, yes, I am talking to you. I am making you the leader. So I'm going to make some cool things happen in the next couple of days so that they will learn to look to you. So the time of the year that it was the rainy season. Rained a lot, even for the desert. Okay? And so they came to this river called the Jordan River. And every year, when it would rain a lot, this Jordan River would go outside of it would flood outside of its banks. The banks are the walls of the river, if you will. And so it would rain so much and the water would get so high that the water would kind of come out and spill over into the land a little bit. And it was that time of the year. So that means that the river was the highest the river gets. Okay? Now, the difference between a river and a lake is that in a river, the water is always running. It's always moving, right? In a lake, it's surrounded, and so the water just kind of sits there like a pool. But in a river, the water's running. It's moving. Okay? And so it's moving, and it's high, which means it was probably moving pretty quickly. And so they get to this river, and God told Joshua to put the men who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant, the priests, in the front of the people. Now, the Ark of the Covenant was this box that God told Moses to build when they built the tent for the tabernacle in the desert. And it was this very, very special box. It was like a treasure box. It was beautifully decorated in gold, and it had angels on the top. And he told them to put special things on the inside. So they put the 10 Commandments inside. They put this branch of wood that had bloomed after it had been torn off of the tree. They put that in there. They had a jar with manna in it, that the manna that came down from heaven. They had that in there. They had different things in this box, the Ark of the Covenant, that reminded them that God was the one taking care of them, that God was the one providing for them. And when they would camp places, they would put this Ark of the Covenant in the middle of their temple. And God would come and kind of sit, so to speak, even though he's a spirit. He would come, and his presence would be with the Ark of the Covenant. And so when he told Joshua, put this ark in the front, he's saying, God's going in front of you. And so the priests were carrying this ark. And so when they got to the tip of the water, where the water was coming out of the river, and they started to walk into the water, which is running quickly, the water stopped. Have you ever seen what happens if you put something where water's coming, right? And it keeps coming. So that water's going to get higher and higher and higher, and then it's going to go over like a dam. Okay? Well, it says that when they started to walk into it, the water just stopped and kept building up into a higher and higher and higher heap of water. And everything from where the water stopped south was dry, because there's nothing coming down to it. So it's not like when he separated the Red Sea and he took this water and put it over here and this water and put it over there. Here, he stopped the water, and all the water is on this side, and on this side there's no water anymore. And so they walked all the way into the middle of the river and stopped, while the rest of Israel walked through on dry land. That had to have reminded them of the Red Sea. And so they're all walking past this scary pile of water on one side and dry land on the other, across to the Jordan, to the Promised Land. And they stood there the whole time while they waited for everybody to get across. Now, when everybody got to the other side, God told Joshua, he said, now Joshua, I want you to tell one person from each tribe, so 12 men, to go in and grab a stone. And so Joshua did. He said, I need a leader from each of the tribes, 12 men, to go in to where the priests are standing in the very middle of the river, and you're each going to grab a big stone from where they're standing. So they did. And they went and they each grabbed a big rock. They went back into the river, grabbed a big rock, and then brought it out. So they had 12 big rocks. And then when they were finished doing that, the priests continued to come to the rest of the people. And as soon as they stepped out to where the water used to be, the water whoosh, went right back in and over the banks. And I'm sure it was this big, huge splash and loud rush of water. And then God told them, I want you to take those 12 stones that you got from the middle of the river, and you're going to set up an altar. And that altar is going to be a way for you to remember that I'm the one bringing you into the Promised Land. That I stopped the river. I'm the same God who stopped the Red Sea. I'm the same God who gave you manna. I'm the same God who protected you when I was sending plagues to Egypt. Okay, so you're going to set up this altar. And then when your children, in a few years, say, what does that altar mean? You're going to say, this is because God stopped the Jordan River and brought us safely into the Promised Land. Making memories, physical memories, so that we can remember the good things God has done. And so they did that. They built this altar. And then that night, they picked fruit from the land, and they ate that fruit. And you know what didn't happen the next day? there was no more manna. Do you know why? Because God had brought them into the promised land and now was going to feed them with the food from the promised land. And so the manna stopped. The provision he'd given them in the desert for 40 years stopped. But that's because he was now giving them new fruit. Isn't that cool? So they must have felt very reassured and confident that God really was going with them, and that God was telling Joshua what he wanted them to do, and that they needed to listen, and they needed to remember. You know what? I'm afraid that we forget things a lot. We're going through a lot of things right now. There's the COVID, and then there's people fighting and being ugly to each other, and there are fires in Arizona, and there are all kinds of not good things happening, right? God is trying to talk to us. He uses his Bible to talk to us. He's talking to us through people. And what I'm afraid of is when these things stop, that we'll forget that God was talking to us, and we'll forget what he said. That's not good. We need to somehow remember. Draw a picture, write it down in a journal, talk to somebody about it, make an art piece, something to help you remember. Remember that God took care of you and kept you safe. Remember that God gave you food to eat from the grocery store. Remember that God kept your house safe. Remember that God is good. And tell other people when they ask you that God is the good one. He's the one who takes care of us. We should do what God told Joshua and Israel to do. Remember and tell other people. Don't forget what God has done. Okay? So they're about to go into this promised land. They're about to have to start fighting people. And it's going to be mean. And it's going to be yuck. And it's going to be hard. But God's reminding them all along the way, this is what I've prepared you for. You represent me, a holy God, to a very sinful people. And you need to act like you represent a holy God. You need to be strong. You need to be courageous. Sometimes it's embarrassing to tell people about God and Jesus. I don't know why, but I do know what it feels like to be embarrassed. But God tells us, don't be embarrassed. It's okay. Fight through that and be strong. Be courageous. Remember what God has done for you and tell people. Because it's so, so important that they hear who God is and what God has done. Especially right now when things are so hard. They need to know that God loves them. They need to know that God sent Jesus to die on the cross so that their lives could be better. They need to know that God is trying to talk to them by putting you in their lives. It's not an accident that you run into people and friends and family and other people that don't know who God and Jesus are. But you do. And so we have a big responsibility, just like Israel did, to tell other people about God and about Jesus. And the best way to do that is to remember what God has done. I want you to do something for me this week. I want you to take a few minutes every day. And I want you to either write in a journal, if you know how to write, or draw pictures of things that God has done for you in your life. Sometimes it's hard to think about them. But if you really stop and think, he's done so much. You have a place to live, you have clothes to wear, you have food to eat, you have health, you can see with your eyes, you can hear with your ears, you can taste with your mouth, you can touch with your hands, we can walk, we can dance, we can laugh, we can cry, and it's okay. These are all things that God has done for us. Okay, so I want you to take a couple minutes every day this week, and I want you to make a diary, a journal of what God has done for you, a memory book. Okay? I would love to see your memory book when you're finished with it. If you want to share it with me, I would love to see it, because it's a good way to practice telling other people about our memories of God. I might try to work on one, and I'll show you, if I have time, next week what my memory book looks like. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I hope you are excited to start this new chapter in the life of Israel and see how powerful our God is and how good He is at keeping promises. I will see you next week, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.